We now have our Kang variant sighting. Ravonna has been found, and was that a sneaky Quantum Mania reference? Salutations and fist bumps, folks. Welcome back to The Grid, and this is a breakdown of Loki Season 2, Episode 3, all of the small details and overlooked things that you may have missed. And there's no time like the present, let's ride. As the episode opens, we get a special rendition of the Marvel fanfare in a carnival ragtime, but this took me a while to actually pin down. We are now in the great city of Chicago, albeit in the 1860s. However, we are in Chicago. However, this setting also reminded me of the Great Depression. We see Renslayer coming out of her time door, which is the first time that we've seen her since she left. Then we get evidence of her whereabouts on the timeline. She is presently on the sacred timeline, which would make sense because she entered into her time door before Sylvie actually killed He Who Remains, which for me was further confirmed by her saying,
"This can't be the right place."
Because this is directly after her conversation with Ms.Minutes, and I believe that she's looking for a more advanced community even for the times than what she's seeing. And she is in the year 1868 in an early version of Chicago. As Ravonna is looking for Ms.Minutes, we get a little bit of her playful yet horrifying nature in the background that is carried through from her last encounter and the end of time. Now, when Ravonna says,
"You told me I was going somewhere important, that I was going to meet someone important,"
that further confirms for me that she was not looking for this type of an environment to be stepping out of a time door into, because this place doesn't look like a big deal at all. Ms.Minutes continues to ask if Ravonna has what she's looking for, revealing what Ravonna was carrying in her bag, a package that is later revealed to be the TVA handbook, which I originally thought was Casey receiving the book from the credit. Ravonna then asks about the plan that is supposed to be carried out, why it wasn't carried out by the person that it was supposed to be in the first place, which she then finds out is because he is now dead. Renslayer tells Ms.Minutes to blend in, which she then turns herself black and white and says,
"Better."
Nope, that just made her creepier.
Then as Ravonna resolves that she is going to deliver the package, Ms.Minutes makes a point to say at this moment in time, meaning that if she didn't do this at this point in time, Victor Timely as a boy becomes something completely different. So what we see in the end for Victor Timely is probably what He Who Remains was trying to keep perpetuating in the end. When Renslayer asks what's in it for her, Ms.Minutes says when he's back up atop the TVA, you and I will be by his side. This statement for me is depicting how delusional and manipulative Ms.Minutes actually is. And as we see Victor Timely as a boy, we see him working on what looks to be candle wax, which shows that he was into invention and creation and energy as a child. We then cut to the Loom crew where status has reached critical. Obi reminds the crew that without the temporal aura of He Who Remains or Ms.Minutes as the override to open the blast door so that he can retrofit the temporal loom with the extractor that he has been working on, they are all
Gonna die!
And even though the branches were pruned in the last episode, they have all, as I mentioned before, now started to grow back. But at whose control though? He then explains the process that could allow the multiverse to coexist.
We need to scale the loom's capacity to manage all those new branches, otherwise it will fail.
But that can't happen unless he opens the blast door. Mobius then suggests that they hack the system, to which Obi is way too excited about, even though he's the person that engineered the entire thing and he knows that they can't hack into it, but he's way too excited anyway. Something ain't right. The blast door starts shaking and Obi's latest message of
We're all gonna die still
is then met with B-15's "Nobody's dying today," which again is completely matter of fact. Like, bruh, stop saying that, ain't nobody going nowhere. They then realize that they need to focus on finding Ms.Minutes because she is the only being that can, but not saying that she will, open the blast door. Mobius mentions that she's gone AWOL, but it's later concluded that if Ravonna was contacted by her, then it is most likely that she is with her now. Loki and Mobius then set out to track down the trace. In the early conversation when coming out of the time door to Chicago, they discuss what events might have brought her to this place in time. one of which being the Chicago Fire of 1871. They then head into the year 1893, the title of this episode and where Victor Timely has now come into his own. As we transition to the next scene, we get a beautiful time door transition again, setting us on a new timeline branch inside of Chicago once again. Notice though, they jump from this sacred timeline to a branch on the timeline. So is Victor Timely now a variant of himself because of what Ravonna did? And as the camera pans up, we can see that this fair takes place on the Midway Placent, which is now a literal stretch of road next to the University of Chicago, which holds festivals. And we then find out the reason for this specific year. 1893 is the same year of the Chicago World's Fair, aka World's Columbian Exposition, a celebration of Columbus's voyage and landing in the New World. That's a whole nother story for a different time, which drew out all of the best and brightest minds to showcase all of their new invention. The event being the largest of its time and the fact that it also used so much electricity meant that inventors showcasing their inventions would prove very lucrative for them in the long run, which is why it makes perfect sense given his nature in terms of Victor Timely being a con artist. It makes sense for him to be there showcasing his temporal loom prototype. But an event like this today would be very similar to or equivalent to a VC competition like TechCrunch. And now that we've reached this point in the timeline, if this has been helpful so far, fist bump that like button for me, because you know, if you do that, YouTube will spread this all over the place. So I appreciate you. And if the theories in this video are getting you to think about some stuff that you've never thought about before, hit the share button too and share this with some friends. Appreciate y'all for listening to my shameless plug. Let's get right back to it. As we enter into this scene, we hear Mobius rattle off a bunch of landmarks and places or figures of this time. The White City, which again is the fair's nickname, and Edison, because names like Tesla and Edison were found at this fair because of the topic of electricity. Everything about this fair is about technology, modernization, electricity, and energy. We then hear a paperboy announcing the latest headline, shouting out the news of the Liberty statue being raised in New York City, while also mentioning the ghost clock haunting the Midway, which then catches the attention of Mobius and Loki. And in the classified ad section of the paper, we can see a ad for the World's Fair Hotel, which is historically known as the Murder Castle of H.H. Holmes, because 3 miles west of the fairgrounds, a hotel was promoted for fairgoers, and some went in and then didn't come out. And what's crazy to me is directly under that is a life insurance ad, Savage. But this depicts Ms.Minutes as a haunting menace, which she is no stranger to because of her time in the Citadel. And I love the way that they ended this shot as a nod to the 1893 era of filmmaking. We then head to the Chinese village and theater portion of the fair, which is very similar to the Chinese theater in Los Angeles, which is featured inside of Iron Man 3. And while Mobius rattles off all of the places that they've been so far, mentioning that refreshments are just a part of his scheme in finding Ravonna, Loki experiences Cracker Jack for the first time, and he is not very thrilled.
It tastes like ash.
No, it doesn't.
Stop the cap.
And this is again where Mobius's sweet tooth comes out, where he fanboys over treats again and again and again. How does he know about this stuff if he doesn't want to know or doesn't know who he is from the timeline? They then run up against a diorama of Thor, Odin, and Balder the Brave. And in this moment, we hear a bit of back and forth about how Loki feels about his place amongst his family. And we get a sense that he feels a little bit left out, or that he isn't as known as he should be. Specifically pointed out because of his comment about Balder the Brave. Balder the Brave, an Asgardian and half-brother of Thor, appears in comics in 1962 in Journey into Mystery number 85. Then Mobius reminds him
That you are one of them. Blows my mind.
which now that Loki has become a more of a hero, his god of mischief nature has become less and less in the forefront. And as they turn around, you can see the cage that will later house the guy that bumps into Loki in the bar. Mobius then mentions places that Ms.Minutes has been spotted: the Ottoman Hippodrome and the balloon park, which at this point Mobius is just having the time of his life. We then get a sign that depicts a few things that are worth mentioning here. First up is Fernando Lang, which is a nod to Ant-Man, specifically Ant-Man and Quantumania, probably because of Victor Timely and He Remains and Kang and all that kind of stuff tying together. But this is a cool namesake nod which comes directly in tow with Scott Lang. Then Loki sees the temporal loom showcase which Victor Timely is actually putting on, mentioning that this is most likely the best place to find and capture or reunite with Ravonna. And as we head into the bar, the band is playing the green theme for Loki.
I think she's here.
Just love the way that this show ties in so many different things and weaves all of the different intricate parts of the Loki theme everywhere inside of this show. And as we come in, we see the guy that lost the bid later on in the bidding war drinking his life away at the bar, first when we come in and when we leave later on.
Seems he had more writing on this than we thought.
And Ms.Minutes is not happy about being in Ravonna's bag. But of course, Ravonna wouldn't want her to come out of the bag in this tight space because she's been terrorizing the entire city all over the place, and she just wouldn't want that to follow her in this small of a place. And oh, by the way, they have a mission that they're there to complete. When Mobius and Loki enter the room, Mobius then mentions that Ravonna would be in that room because she does like a good drink, and so does he. And that's a callback to when they shared a drink together inside of her office, and when she looks down at the ring that is now there because of the cup that he left, or the glass that he left. And then we get the post-credit scene from Quantumania. And as the curtain opens, we now get a glimpse of what we now know to be the temporal loom. And in this scene, can we just flat out just sit back and admire the sheer genius that is Jay Majors for this performance? I mean, this man absolutely bodied each and embodiment of Kang that there have been on screen to date. And none of them, not a single one, is exactly alike. Close to each other, yes, but distinct to nobody's business. That man needs an Oscar for every Oscar, Emmy, whatever you gotta give him for whatever this is, give it to him, because this performance is A1. And all of the sidebars aside, we also hear a heckler ask Timely about his prototype and his knowledge of the future, which he quickly comes back and says way more than you do. And the camera cuts to Ravonna, who is impressed by what he just said, because given the time frame of when he's saying it, and he's also a black man in this case, he's saying it to a person that would actually probably have more weight than him. But he says it nonetheless, and he also, or at least at this point, it's speculative that he also understands more about time and time travel than anyone in that room. Victor Timely then demonstrates how his machine works and changes the minds of everyone in that room, because at one moment they didn't believe that it worked at all, and now everyone wants a piece of the pie, because now that they hear the vision of powering the world, not just the city, and they can actually see it working, you can actually hear the main heckler change completely when he says, which is then directly followed up by Mobius saying they have to get him into the TVA, which is basically because he's the only one that can fix what's going on inside of that temporal loom, because technically, he designed it. But after the presentation, we hear Mobius and Loki debate on if it's a good idea to bring him back to the TVA. Because though he does present a threat to the future, they have a very
Serious now problem.
Ravonna then introduces herself to Victor for the first time, and you can see that he isn't very mad about being stopped by her at all. However, she is then pushed to the side when the top hat investor comes flying through the crowd saying that he has to have this machine, specifically offering a partnership to Victor Timely, which Victor says he does not do partnership. I'll touch on that briefly now, but later on I'll go into it a little bit deeper in the video. Specifically, Kang doesn't like love, and partnerships would be love in a sense to him. But also in this exchange, Victor says that a lot of investors are lining up to inquire about his invention, and it's completely false. And you can tell by the way that he pauses before he actually says what he's about to say. You can further see the con artist that is Victor Timely when a deal is struck and the camera gets a close-up of him, and the smirk that he has on his face is like, bruh, I just pulled one on over all y'all. And again, as Timely is leaving the bar, he hands over a bill to the bidder who lost, who I believe he actually has a soft spot for the underdog, because he kind of is. And again, this is displaying a different type of variant than what we thought was going to be in terms of Victor Timely, showing that he actually has a heart. The bully that Loki ran into inside of the bar now wants to fight about it outside, to which Loki chooses a different type of violence instead. And I like the way that Mobius actually has to remind him to do this gently so that he doesn't blow him to smithereens, literally. Coming out into the street, Mobius, Ravonna, and Loki corner Timely and basically try to get him to go in their direction. But in the background, we hear an explosion.
My future!
Which to me is assumed to be the temporal loom prototype that Timely was just showcasing, which is confirmed by the top hat investor's voice shouting through the crowd noise. And after seeing the mechanical pants that Timely has prototyped and sold to the councilman, and then after also promising to come by his home and actually give it some tweaks, Loki calls him a trickster, which is ironic coming from him because he literally is the exact same thing all throughout the MCU. Loki and Timely find some common ground because Loki understands that because he is a trickster, his ego can be played up more than most people in this particular situation, demonstrated by the way that Timely immediately ingratiates Loki by saying,
Enlightened fellows never do.
Then the realization that Timely's invention is a fake comes to a head when the investor comes out and shouts,
Your invention's a fake! Timely!
then prompting a chase scene. It's hilarious and also uncovers a bunch of Easter eggs all over the place. Inside of this sequence, we see an area of the festival where Egyptian hieroglyphics can be seen, and one of Kang's variants can be seen as Victor hides from the investor. But this is also a possible nod to the fact that Ravonna is in the vicinity, and Ravonna becomes Moon Knight in the comics at one point. B-15 calls Mobius about a potential dangerous signal hitting that branch on the timeline, when he explains to her that they have a variant of He Who Remains that they could possibly bring back to the TVA. But we then find out that the signal being described is Sylvie, who comes machete in hand ready to kill Victor Timely. And this also calls back the fact that in the last episode she said that if she met or came in contact with any of He Who Remains variants, she would in fact kill them. Ravonna then mentions that Sylvie tracked them to this location, when Mobius turns that on its head and says, do you think she possibly came after you? Because Ravonna is the reason why Sylvie was actually taken from her timeline in the first place. And this also reveals that Ravonna is a time fugitive, because she says to Mobius, we don't work together anymore. Back on the Ferris wheel, Sylvie continues to try to kill Victor Timely while Loki is continuing to explain why the TVA actually needs him to come back with them. Because if the TVA does not survive, Sylvie's home and everything in it and everything that she is actually fighting for at the moment is completely gone. And the only man that can actually save or possibly save what's going on with the temporal loom is Victor Timely. And as the Ferris wheel situation continues to unfold, we hear more of the conversation between Ravonna and Mobius as they play the blame game between who ended their friendship. And in this exchange, we also hear Mobius say the tagline of the season,
Running out of time. We need your help.
which is to me another version of time is running out, which now makes more sense understanding what is going on with the temporal loom. I have to pause here.
Hold up.
Because there's a lot to unpack in the following scene. Random discretion is advised.
Here we go.
Sylvie mentions that if Ravonna hadn't given the TVA handbook to a younger Victor Timely, he would have remained harmless, which suggests that this variant has a different outlook on life than what we've thought he actually has been or would have been because of what Kang or the lore of Kang actually is. However, in the same token, Loki has now met two different versions of He Who Remains at this point. He Who Remains and now Victor Timely. He has not met Kang, the one from Quantumania. At this point, everyone that he has seen, or at least right now in terms of the variants that he is seeing, have been on the lighter side of the spectrum in terms of being good or bad. And based on his relationship with Victor Timely going forward, it might have some implications on what outcomes may or may not be available for Secret Wars. Sylvie mentions that this is all very familiar, isn't it? Which is a callback to the same endeavor or same intricate situation that happened inside of the Citadel, where He Who Remains, Loki, and Sylvie are basically in the same position fighting over the timeline. And specifically, Loki is trying to talk Sylvie out of killing a version of He Who Remains. So with this in mind, is this the reason why Sylvie is seen in the future of the TVA in the first episode? Ms.Minutes then gets her time to shine when Ravonna calls on her to distract the crowd, which offers enough cover for Ravonna and Timely to skedaddle on out of there. And Mobius is again having way too much fun on the timeline when he tries to get Loki to get on a double bike, and Loki is not having any of it. And we also get a few playful moments between Ravonna and Victor Timely, showing the potential of a relationship that could be brewing between them.
Which Ms.Minutes is not happy about at all.
Timely then shows Ravonna his invention, a refrigerator chair, which, and this might be a little bit of a stretch, is possibly where he gets the idea for his time chair.
Aha! Aha!
And I, for one, enjoyed the humanization that we were able to get from Victor in this moment. We get a chance to see his wit, charm, and character to the point where you actually want to root for him. And when he tells Ms.Minutes that she is absolutely singular, it's probably one of the more genuine but heavy yet thrown away lines in the episode. Heavy because when she returns the gesture back to him, she ends it with,
You're pretty singular yourself. At least, you will be.
However, we know that Kang and singular don't necessarily go hand in hand because he is singular and plural both at the same time. And then Victor finally comes to an endpoint when he demands that the ladies in the room tell him exactly what is going on. Ravonna then tells him that a version of himself created the TVA a long, long time ago, which two Norse gods decided that was not a good idea, and they decided to kill him.
What?
Which that action then resulted in the creation of new timelines, each of them seeing a different version of himself, which is the same story that He Who Remains told Sylvie and Loki. As he comes to grips with what Ravonna and Ms.Minutes are saying, he says that he's had dreams about this type of thing happening, meaning that he has had encounters with dream walking. So did Wanda somehow get a hold of him inside of her travels during Multiverse of Madness? Or is she somehow getting a hold of him throughout the time traveling situations of the TVA at the moment? There are so many questions and so many things that we can just dive into inside of this series, and that's why it's so good. And Ms.Minutes is a bit clingy, ain't she? Something ain't right. Something ain't right. Victor shot his shot at Ravonna when he gives her the...
And you, Mrs.
Ms. Ravonna.
That boy's smooth.
And Ms.Minutes is salty.
Now, when Ravonna lets her hair down completely and starts describing what's going on inside of the TVA in terms of the temporal loom, she describes it with the temporal loom, fam. She hasn't been there the entire time that the thing has been exploding. In fact, she actually left before it started. So how in the world does she know about the temporal loom explosion going on inside of the TVA? Just saying, seems like a plot hole to me. Come on, man. Anyway, Victor asks why they aren't working with Loki and his butler, Moby, because the story that they are currently telling him is the exact same story that they told him. And Ravonna then mentions that Loki actually can't be trusted and decides to switch sides pretty much at will. It's a character trait at this point, which is true, because he's done that in the MCU since his inception. I guess she's right about that one. But then the meeting in Victor's home is cut short when the investors find him at his home and start banging on the door. And I love the way that they skedaddled on out of the window. As they are doing this, Victor is explaining the fact that Chicago is just a place that he does all of his sales. Wisconsin is the place that he actually has his lab because it's less in taxes, which is true.
Yep, Chicago, Illinois, the home of wind, construction, and taxes.
Ravonna actually suggests going through a time door, which Ms.Minutes completely shuts down because they can track them while doing that. I mean, I don't know, maybe. They already did that. And something slightly ironic regarding Victor's latest prototype is that it is across what Victor calls the Caribbean of the Midwest, and that is actually a real place in Michigan, but the actual destination is called Bull Shoals Lake. The more you know. And then the chase scene begins, which for me was probably one of the highlights of this entire episode. I mean, there's so many highlights, but this is one of them. And Loki gets a chance to use his magic again. We then see Timely and Ravonna come out of hiding, which they had just dipped off into the hollow area moments before Loki and Mobius appeared in the area. As they board the boat, the layout and feel of this, although not as chaotic as that particular scene, put me in the mindset of Miss Marvel when she was at the train station. And as Victor hands his luggage to the crewman, he tells him to use his legs, which means that what he could be traveling with is an earlier version of his time chair. Victor then starts pondering and describing his time with the TVA guidebook. He mentions that this is the book where he has placed all of his ideas and inventions inside of. And we get a dope moment between them as they pass Navy Pier, which is where Ravonna actually makes her mistake of mentioning that she's looking forward to their partnership. And Victor is not very fond of partnerships at all. And as promised earlier in the video, I said that I would dive deeper inside of that. So the reason why he doesn't is because or at least I'm speculating from the comics, the reason why he doesn't is because inside the comics, it's the only thing that allows him to be killed. Basically, every time that he comes in contact with Ravonna and decides to love her, he either has a situation where she dies or he dies, or both of them. And specifically, I'm taking that from the most recent version or the most recent comic series, Only Myself to conquer. And I believe that some of this may come from his childhood, specifically inside of the MCU, and that's how it carries inside of his story through the storyline of Kang. Because if you pay attention, inside of the scene where we first encounter him as a child in terms of Victor Timely, he is by himself, but then Ravonna is dropped like a bad habit, literally. As we head to Victor's lab, we hear Ms.Minutes describe how much He Who Remains and Victor actually are alike. And on the board, we can see what looks to be a Mobius strip, which is the tech that Tony Stark used to allow the Avengers to time travel inside of Endgame. And we also get a glimpse of all of the clocks inside of Victor Timely's lab, which seem to point in different directions to different time, and none of them point to the same time twice. And then we see his most prized possession, his time chair, in prototype form. Let's move into the conversation that Ms.Minutes has with Victor. In it, she mentions that she was created before the Multiverse of War and before the TVA, specifically as a regular AI for playing chess.
You are a toy!
Which, by the way, seems like a game He Who Remains would have been playing a lot. Follow me on this one. Her AI tech had to be based on someone or something, which brings me back to the fact that at some point, He Who Remains modeled Ms.Minutes after Ravonna inside of a particular time in the timeline. And to go a little bit further, he fell in love with her so much to the point that if or when she died inside of the timeline, the only way that he could keep her essence with him is by placing it inside of an AI. Because in the comics, that is exactly what he tries to do in terms of the reasons why he goes inside of time traveling in the beginning or in general after meeting her, is to then find her again when she died. And then Ravonna comes out with the big guns, with the first prototype of a pruning gun or a pruning stick from Victor Timely. While Victor tries to explain away his actions in terms of what she just saw with Ms.Minutes and all that kind of stuff, which Ravonna is having none of. And then Ravonna pulls a, from now on, I'm the captain of the ship, when she demonstrates that she means business with the pruner. And I have to bring this up. Where would Victor have gone if she had pruned him actually? Down to the end of time inside the Citadel? Inside the Void? How does pruning work now? Loki and Mobius burst on the scene and explain to Ravonna that though she believes that she is in the right because she's hurt, what she's doing is actually a bad idea because he is needed back inside of the TVA. But in this exchange, we hear how much Ravonna has seemingly sacrificed for the TVA and her humanity specifically she mentions, and that made me think of the fact that she took Sylvie from her timeline. She may be feeling guilty because of it. And then Sylvie comes in and knocks all this stuff over. And this moment between Sylvie and Victor is absolutely incredible. Victor, to me, now at this point, seems like he would be one of the good variants of Kang, which could actually possibly happen because He Who Remains said there were good and bad. Sylvie then confronts Ravonna, asking her again what she wanted in terms of being on top of the TVA, because she says in her mind she's killed Ravonna multiple different times, and that is actually kind of sickening to think about over and over and over again, to madness pretty much, which then signified that she wanted her to suffer for what she did to Sylvie. And when she kicked her through that time door and she landed in the end of time, I literally fell out almost on the floor. I mean, what in the world is going on? But something I also took note of here, Sylvie opens the time door without having or needing the ability to type in a direction or a location of where she wants to go. She literally thought about it, swiped her fingers, and it appeared, and she was there, which further supports the fact that she possibly at this point is the new Time Lord, standing in the stead of He Who Remains at current. Then Ms.Minutes appears and tells Ravonna that there's a whole lot of stuff that she has on Victor Timely and all kinds of He Who Remains variants, and that she has something that Ravonna would want to know as well. But she doesn't want to tell her, or Ravonna wouldn't want to know, because it would make her pretty angry. So for me, that begged questions of, does she know the whereabouts of Kang from Quantumania? And does she also understand that Ravonna and Kang, or He Who Remains at this point, were also lovers, and that her timeline situation was wiped out because of the fact that He Who Remains was her lover? Like, there are so many questions that I have right now. Does she know that Ravonna is going to die? What if